Great pleasure to see all of you. This is a very special occasion because the first time since the Karajan conference, we have somebody in person, which is Matthias Röder, who is a board member of the Karajan Foundation and managing director of the Karajan Institute. And so we have the great pleasure today to discuss about data, artificial intelligence, and music. This is special in many ways because Mattias is a musician.
Yeah.
You have been a scientist, and now you're a practitioner, as which is, I think, a little bit too limited to actually sort of like fully outline the scope. We know each other from a number of conferences, and you have done amazing things, including Beethoven's 10th Symphony. And so basically the idea is to give an insight of why and how these things hang together. And we have decided we're going to do it sort of in a sort of casual conversation style. Matthias will also show stuff, but we will start in a conversation. And I like to thank the people who came here. Feel welcome to take any position with your body.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
Exactly. And so one thing that is also special is that the Karajan group is in full conference summer mode. So there's very few of us. So this is for everybody to catch up. And one thing which I would like to sort of like maybe do as a start, we, in cultural data analytics, have brought together people from 31 countries in December. And the ratio of things is approximately now a third, literature, visual material and music, visual materials and arts, meaning photographs and stuff like that. And the third one, performing arts, mostly movies and film and news and stuff like that. But music is not very expressed in this whole thing. So data-driven music analysis is not something that is very, very frequent. The same could be said for ballet and dance and so on. But this is not due to the fact that this doesn't exist. Actually, we will sort of get to the core of this. In some sense, computer graphics, data analysis, and so on are deeply intertwined with music. And my experience working with musicians is it's a little bit like biology. People have done it 20 years earlier, typically in music, as like in biology. And whenever you want to look at something, people have done it in music, which is sort of a cool thing.
It's exactly the opposite from my perspective.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so we can. That's excellent. So there's already a starting point for the discussion. So we also welcome everybody to chime in. But first, we're going to listen to Mattias and see what he has to say. And sort of, yeah, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. As Max already said, my background is in music. I'm very interested in sort of the intersection of creativity, technology, and science. And even though I have been sort of an active musician and then studied musicology and did a PhD in that field, I was for a long time very interested in science and computer science in particular. But always, I should emphasize this, as a layman. So sort of as a hobbyist, I did computer scientist. This was my first interest in this field was with genetic algorithms, and then later on with artificial neural networks around the years of 97 to 2002. This is the time I'm talking about. So I started my journey into technology from the field of music when I bought my first computer very late, age 20. This was in 97. And the first thing I did was deinstall the Windows 95 and install a Linux variety. But the computer was so low in power and capabilities that I only had a text prompt, basically, the terminal. So I started to learn how to code this way. I started to read all the requests for comments which came with the operating system. So I learned about, TCP/IP and the protocols for send mail and all these kinds of nerdy things. And by the end of the process, I was able to run my Linux box quite competently, and I picked up some Perl on the side. But nothing outside of this domain in terms of computer science. I started hanging out with people on IRC, on IRC, Channel Linux, and they taught me more about this kind of thing. And interestingly, there I met a group of musicians, and they were fascinated by the fact that there is a musician in a Channel Linux trying to understand, stuff about SQL databases and how to bring a database into the fifth normal form. And they said, like, what is this crazy dude doing here? We invite them to our music channel called Channel Funk Flamingos. And the Funk Flamingos were a band. And we made music over the internet together by sending each other recordings, in MP3 format, and iteratively adding music to it. And, this went on for quite a while. And then someone had the crazy idea, well, why don't we meet in real life? And I said, what do you mean? Well, we could meet in real life and make music together. So I went to Aachen, where they were based. They were all students at the famous university there. And we made music for one whole night. And, a set of songs came out of that. This is a very long story to tell you a little bit about my approach to all of this. It's, deeply steeped in the field of hacking and trying out and not being very systematic about it. But that was a beautiful beginning for me, because anything was really possible. At the time, I felt like, wow, the internet was just getting started and there are all these capabilities. And the idea was back then to put everything into a database. For me, every problem I encountered, everything I did in life, well, can I put it into a database? And I managed to do that with a project. And this was my first project in the field of music and technology that went a little bit beyond sort of playing around and having fun with it. When I was working at the Bach Archive in Leipzig, which is sort of a premier place to study the life and works of Johann Sebastian Bach and his sons and the whole family and so on. And I went there for a research trip to learn how to distinguish the handwriting of music copyists in J.S. Bach's manuscripts, which is for someone who was in the philology of music an important aspect, because you want to know who actually copied down that music that you think is Bach, or maybe it isn't. And so there are experts in the Bach archive who know about sort of the characteristics of these handwritings. And there were systematic studies done, actually lending methodology from the field of criminal forensics on how to identify, the scribe of something. And I started to think about this problem, and I felt like, again, well, maybe I can put it in a database. And so I developed a database system together with the scientists there that would, catalog all of these characteristics of these manuscripts. Essentially a simple database with images, cut and paste, of these symbols, the clefs, and the way to write a notehead and so on, and just started to catalog all these manuscripts there. And this scribe database then, was picked up by others, and we started to work on it collaboratively. And for a while, it was really sort of a hot topic in the field of computational musicology to do these kinds of databases. Well, this was really around 2000, and we had dissertations to write and so on. So I went to Boston to do a PhD in musicology with Christoph Wolff, who is a Bach scholar. And there I met folks from the computer science department, in particular students of Leslie Wayland. Leslie Wayland, you will know, is famous for having developed the probably approximately correct learning approach. And his students were into learning systems as well. And this is when I first was exposed to these ideas of artificial neural. Is there a question?
Rodrigo, hello. He's joining us from Chile. That's really awesome. But I think he's muted, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we took this idea of the database for scribes and we said, well, can we teach an artificial neural network to distinguish between these handwriting characteristics? And we managed, we is in this case, I managed to create a training data set for this artificial neural network that was, configured and trained then by Vitaly Feldman, who was this colleague of mine, PhD student of Leslie. And basically we could show, and this was 2002, we could show that the neural network in principle was very well capable of distinguishing all these different handwriting styles in these music manuscripts, which, this is a big thing when you come from it from a music technology perspective, because optical music recognition in itself and identifying, symbols on a page is actually quite a hard problem and has only recently been solved sufficiently. So to show that a network is capable of doing this kind of work was really big for us. Again, we had to write dissertations, and so this project was never really brought into a stage where one could create a product out of it. But I was so fascinated by the capabilities of these simple networks back then that I thought, okay, the network is now what used to be the database for me. Whenever I would encounter a problem, I would ask myself, can I train a neural network on this problem and solve it that way? And so, life happens. You finish your work, which was primarily, the dissertation was in historical musicology, had nothing to do with technology whatsoever. And then I started this computational musicology group at Harvard, which was essentially a series of events where we would bring in people from composition, people from music production, people from history of music, everyone who was working with technology to present their ideas. And I knew this was kind of the future that I wanted to pursue. I applied for jobs at the time in various places, pitching this idea of computational musicology and, starting programs and so on, and it was rejected everywhere. Everyone was like, oh, no, thank you. We don't want the computers to do our work. And by the way, what kinds of questions would we be asking anyway? So for me, it was clear that was not the way forward. And so I was very happy when I was approached by a headhunter to see if, I would be interested in leading the Karajan Institute in Salzburg, which Herbert von Karajan, as some of you may know, was one of the great musicians of the 20th century, a conductor, conducted all the great orchestras in the world, but was closely connected to the technologies field. So von Karajan was the first musician who broadcast stereophonic radio. He was one of the first to really create music films. So creating a film around a musical performance. He created companies around that with Leo Kirch, with others. And he was the person behind the compact disc from the musical side. So he would work very closely with the founder of Sony, Akio Morita, in bringing this format into the world. By the way, the first press conference when they announced that the compact disc format would be released was in Salzburg, upon the invitation of Herbert von Karajan, with Akio Morita and the CEO of Philips, and they started it all. To this day, we have one of the big CD plants in the world in Salzburg, in a little town nearby. It's a whole success story. It all came from this fascination of this man with technology and using technology to bring his music to new audiences. And so for me, when I was offered this job, I thought like, well, maybe this is the place where I can actually follow up on some of these ideas that I had back then. Yeah, this is maybe a little bit longer than I anticipated in presenting myself and what my background is, but I felt it was necessary to give you a little bit of a sense of where I'm coming from. And so all of the projects that I've done in this field, and I'll get into the Beethoven example in a short moment, were always driven by this curiosity and at the same time also the idea that I wanted to be practical, and in the end there should be a result. So in what I did, I always try to convene people of varying disciplines, enable them to do all of these things. So when you say Matthias completed Beethoven's 10th, well, that's absolutely not true, because it was a big team of people, but I was just happy to be the person to lead the project. And yeah, so I have notes. I've completely deviated from them already.
Success.
It's like a jazz approach, exactly. I mean, now you come in, you play your solos, I guess. Maybe just a few remarks about the types of questions that I'm really interested in right now, and where I think I like to spend my energy. And the first one is I'm very interested in this kind of sense of how can I learn or how can a system learn in a highly unstructured environment. What I mean by that is we talked about databases, we talked about training sets and artificial neural networks, and having created lots of these training sets, you understand that they have to be very structured in order for the network to really do something with it, right? And how can we add more complexity to the training data set so that a network can learn different modalities, can engage with the world that is more complex than a highly structured training data set that was created for a single purpose, like finishing a sketch of Beethoven in his style. That's a very targeted use case, I believe. I'm very interested in this question of how creativity really emerges. Creativity, we thought for a long time, creativity was this sort of one faculty that we have, and it's sort of a universal kind of approach to the world, but it's actually something that pops up in all kinds of human behavior. And for me, it's fascinating to study this. My wife and I, we have created a nonprofit for this, the Sonophilia Foundation, to really bring creativity researchers together to discuss this topic. So creativity emerges, in my opinion, from the interplay of the environment, knowledge that I have, and memory. And this is an important other aspect, how can we overcome these narratives of genius, especially in music, right? Where we say like, oh, this is a creative genius, this person is really creative, I'm not creative, and replace it with a narrative of what I call collective creativity. Collective creativity being the interaction between us when we try to solve a problem, but also bringing into this process the creative output of the generations that came before us. For instance, in music, this is very important, where we interact with composers that came before us, where we interact with musicians who are contemporaneous to us. Then I'll skip a few of these points. I have quite a few of them, but the other thing that I'm extremely interested in is how can we apply this collective creativity to problem solving in specific sciences, but also in bigger topics as a whole. This is a separate topic from today. I'm not going to get into this, but it plays into my thinking a lot. Creativity, like technology, can be used in multiple domains of human expertise, and we should not be limiting our thinking about creativity to only the musical domain, artistic domain, and so on. Lastly, and this is what I'm now doing increasingly at the Karajan Institute and in my work as a music manager, how can we build digital representations of collective creativity. And what I mean by that is, how can we build interactive AI systems that let you interact with the corpus of an artist or a group of artists? For instance, in our case, the AI we built for Beethoven, or like what we're doing right now in the Karajan Institute to actually digitize all of the content around the life of von Karajan and making that available for third parties to interact with. Really the collective creativity that this man has curated throughout his life. I'm very consciously trying to avoid the words his works and this artist and so on, because as you will see, he, like many other great artists in the past, were really nodes in a network of other creatives, and then he was channeling a lot of that creativity through his name and brand, obviously, but it's a process that involves many people, and the result is therefore not an artwork of one particular individual, but of a collective group. So maybe I'll jump into a couple of examples now, and I want to begin with talking about the types of data that an institution like the Karajan Institute actually has and can make use of in such an interactive digital representation of the von Karajan collective. I'll start with something that is probably not very obvious, and that is accounting statements of music labels. So anytime a record gets listened, bought, produced, sold, or drops off a lorry, it's going to be recorded by the company who is selling these records. And this digital footprint typically is not used at all, actually, but once a quarter, you create a statement and you send it to the artist to tell them, this is how much money we owe you. But this information has so much information in it. Places where someone was listening to your music, frequency, the type of product that was successful, the type of venues through which it was listened to, and so on. So it's a rich data set for understanding the actual impact of your creative work in the world. And if you collect all of this data, and we have collected over 300 million entries in a huge database of all of the accounting statements of von Karajan going back 35 years, we see developments of taste, development of, geographical locations where people start to engage more and more with classical music, where others are, engaging less. It's super fascinating to have this kind of data and to make it available through APIs internally to other parts of our application. We have started to analyze the musical interpretations of von Karajan with the varying orchestras. So, for instance, a piece like Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, he performed with the Berlin Philharmonic, 25 times in a concert. There are 3 studio recordings or 4 studio recordings with that orchestra. There are 15 to 17 live concert recordings of that piece. And that provides us with unique insight into how the musical interpretation of this piece has evolved over time. Basically, what we do is we take a symbolic music representation of the score. This could be a simple thing like a MIDI file, which is used to, I think everyone knows here what MIDI is, right? It's sort of, a language to help instruments. It helps computers and electronic instruments to communicate between one another. It basically says which note is played when, for how long, and with what intensity. Or you have music XML files, which are more like HTML files that describe which notes are being played and what rhythm and so on. We take this as a basis for the piece of the Seventh Symphony, and then you essentially align note by note all of the audio recordings to the score. And then you can start to analyze the distribution of tempi in this piece of music. How has the interpretation of the 50s differed from the interpretation of the 80s? Is there a trend in tempo? You can look at, harmonic overtones and see how the sound of the orchestra has changed. You can look at many different factors of music making if you have this kind of data set. And we started doing this. It's a very time-consuming way because the technology isn't there yet to really load in the audio and just get all of this data straight away from the computer. There's a lot of manual labor involved. So what we did is we focused on specific moments in important pieces in the Western canon of classical music. And we started off there. And the results are really astonishing. What you can see here. One of the things that we found was there is clearly a different approach to making music when Karajan and the orchestra are in front of an audience versus when they are in the studio. They emphasize different things in the performance. It's almost as if these are different types of pieces, but within the groups they are consistent. It's actually something that one could say, well, it's kind of clear because the people involved in the performance. But the extent to which this happens is quite astonishing.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, and maybe we can, like, if participants, if you like to ask questions, please.
Anytime. Otherwise, I'm on auto mode and.
So yeah, this is sort of something which nerdy record buyers do a lot, right? Like,
yeah.
I have this habit whenever I'm interested in a piece, I buy sort of like for $3 or euros. All the copies I can get. And then there's a very typical process, which I, sort of catch myself in, which is I try to figure out, with Mahler's first, I want to have the one that has the most suspense at the beginning. And then I find that, and then, the other 18 recordings I never listen to again. And so the question is like, is the result of this is obviously richer than that, right? It's richer than this targeted thing, and there's probably more than just anecdotalism. Do you see a kind of complete rewriting of like going beyond the it sounds like Karajan kind of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For me, the reason we are doing this, or the reason I'm interested in this kind of thing, is to build AIs that allow you to interact with the recording fully. So in a way, me as a person at home being able to manipulate a recording as if I'm conducting the orchestra, and being able to create new kinds of remixes of all of this material in a way that I use the AI as an expressive instrument. And for me, all of this is preparing a data set that we can use for this kind of stuff. So a lot of people would probably say, yeah, but why would someone take a recording of person XYZ and then change it? And I don't have a great answer to this, other than that I think it would be so cool to be able to do it. and I believe that these kind of approaches to engaging with a recording are creating so much, sort of stimulating so much creativity in the listeners. It elevates the importance of the original recording tremendously. Think about it. If you engage with a cultural artifact in a passive way once, or a more engaged but still passive way by listening to it attentively, and then compare that with a situation where you actually engage with the work as a creator, as a co-creator, as something that stimulates new creations, then the importance of the original thing gets elevated tremendously. So I'm very interested in these kinds of
question. Why?
Yeah. True. So these are the things that I find extremely interesting.
just you mentioned two things now, right? So one is the why you just answered. The other one is like you also said that it raises the importance of the original. And so here's I sort of like for myself frame is the Max Richter effect. You know, he has this sort of like new Four Seasons of Vivaldi, which when it came out, I don't know, I had it on autoplay basically, and then for whatever reason, it was in a different room. So I went to the records and I got another version, which was Karajan with Anne-Sophie Mutter. And then it was like, wow, I was like, I can't listen to Max Richter anymore because like this is just crap compared to this original recording. But then this is sort of out of sync with the other use you have. Like for anybody who has ever done this, which I'm pretty sure anybody who has access to Ableton Live or a granular synthesizer has loaded in something classical and you can play around. And then, you know, in the end of these sessions, one is frustrated because, you know, you learn so much about the piece by sort of honing in and whatever. And then whatever recording you produce was like, yeah, I couldn't upload it to SoundCloud because I would hurt the rights of whoever owns the original recording. How do we deal with that?
That's a huge topic. In a way, when we worked on the Beethoven AI, which maybe I'll say a few words about that, just to put it in context. But when we worked on this project, we were lucky in that none of the things we used for the training set were in any way copyrighted anymore. I mean, Beethoven had been long dead, and we basically created most of these files from scratch or used specifically, you know, published with an MIT license or open source license. And so we were absolutely sure that we didn't use anyone's copyright in the process of creating this model. You point to an important aspect, and that is sort of the part of my job that results in the gray hair I have, is this almost impossibility of doing something creatively today with the tools we have without, you know, spending a fortune on legal and business affairs managers who make sure that all of the rights are cleared and that everyone who is a creator gets remunerated. And I'm not saying this out of a critical perspective, it's just a matter of there's a highly complex interaction to create something new in the world of art and to make sure that everyone is heard and gets equally paid and fairly compensated is just an enormous undertaking. It used to be easy in the old days, not because it was so different because of the technology, but because in effect, most people's rights were actually not honored back then. So you would get one artist get paid, the others were basically, they didn't even know they had rights. Okay, so it was
the payment break phenomenon that
yeah, exactly. I mean, it took so long for the original creators of this to, you know, get compensated, if at all. So now we can actually use technology to mitigate these problems, I believe. For instance, when we create training data sets for AIs, we have to do it transparently. I do believe very strongly in using a kind of blockchain system to record all of these use cases of intellectual property in machine learning and so on. And we can automatically disperse any funds this way too. But the business itself is not set up in such a way. It's in a way, the music business is too hierarchical and too centristic. And there are so many different interests in the business that it's very hard to create a transparent model. So this is frustrating if you want to innovate in that field. But you know, you just basically you try to push a little bit the boundary of what's possible with one product that is highly visible, and then, you know, hope that others catch up and find a way forward.
Do you see things where you know, there's the number of chord progressions for pop songs is limited, right? So it's super hard to produce something new even though you don't copy, but just playing four tones on the guitar, you copy five other songs, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's nothing new.
Okay.
And it might surprise the listeners that I have this opinion, but I don't think that in music there is a lot of innovation.
Okay.
So I believe that when you take a composition by Mozart, for instance, it's not very, I mean, there's not a lot of new stuff in there. I'd say like 99% of all of the notes and all of the pieces by Mozart have been heard before in similar configurations. It's a question of how you remix all of this. And the patterns in there are completely the same. A musical innovation comes maybe every 50 to 100 years. I'm thinking about stuff like what John Cage did, or you know, Monteverdi, when he started to use the dissonances in the wrong way, you know, in his madrigal books. And then you have all of a sudden the system gets changed and people start to use this new pattern more and more and more until, again, you know, it becomes an old thing. So I think music is not necessarily in itself very innovative, which is contradictory to the feeling we have when we listen to a new song on the radio. We think like, oh my God, it's so cool, it's so new. But yeah, no, it isn't. So it's not a problem that you have only 4 chords in pop music, which, by the way, is a gross oversimplification.
Sure.
But you can do so much with these songs. So yeah, I don't think it's a problem necessarily. Should I show some of the Beethoven? Okay, yeah, sure.
We have to show it from here, right?
Let me first show a few images, okay? So
Yeah, that's the usual Zoom reverb.
that was John Cage meets Dead Mouse.
It's not something that's fully explored, right? The full possibility of
feedback loops.
Zoom microphone feedbacks.
So you guys can still hear me, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So when Beethoven wrote his 9th symphony, he was also working on what he's called the other symphony. We're very happy that, or lucky that, Beethoven was a very meticulous and systematic collector of musical ideas. So every idea he had, or we believe every idea, but maybe it wasn't every idea, but a lot of the musical ideas he had, he would write them down in sketchbooks. He had sketchbooks that he would carry around while being on a walk outside. He had sketchbooks that were on his desk, and he would copy ideas in there and he would rearrange ideas. He would work on them a little bit, but this is more like a systematic repository of ideas. It's ordered by chronology, but when you look at them carefully, you can go in and see different layers. So he goes back to earlier sketchbooks. He copies ideas from earlier sketchbooks back into the newest volume and so on. So it's his laboratory. And these are pretty well preserved. They are in different libraries around the world today, but musicologists have worked on it quite a bit. If you look at one random example here, you see the sketchbook blown up a little bit. You see the musical notation is rudimentary. Often you don't have clefs. You know, things are really only a hint of what they could sound like in the finished version. Scholars often have to debate what is actually on the page, but overall, we are pretty confident that we understand what Beethoven wrote down there. So this is an example of the original page or reproduction of that. Then a blown up image of one idea. We call that a sketch versus the sketchbook that has all of the sketches of a given time period. And then a translation into modern notation. And you can see that a lot of the things in brackets and so on, they are assumed. it's a messy business. That's what I was referring to earlier when I said, like, learn from uncertain environments. Now, there are about 40 to 45 sketches for the 10th Symphony. And some of these are longer, like this one. Others are very short. It's not enough to actually have a composition and create a composition out of it. What you need to do is you need to interpret a lot, you need to extrapolate, you need to enhance, and you need to make it longer, essentially. Human has done that before a couple of years ago, 20 or 30 years ago. They took the long sketches that were left of the 10th Symphony and finished them. And that was a reconstruction of the 10th Symphony done by Barry Cooper. He had left many of the short sketches completely untouched, which makes absolute sense because the minute he would take them up and add to it, he would put in a lot of his own ideas. And so that wouldn't have been a real reconstruction. So we said, well, what if we can train a computer system to be able to write or complete melodies in the style of Beethoven and let it work with these short fragments only? And this is one of these shorter fragments here. What is it? 6, 7 bars of music. And what would a system do with that? And we essentially were asked to do this project in 2019. The idea is not mine, actually. It comes from Deutsche Telekom. I had given a talk there on data, music, and emotion a couple of years earlier. And then they called me out of the blue, Michael Schult, and he was responsible for advertisement there. And he said, hey, we want to do something special for the big Beethoven anniversary coming up, because Telekom is a Bonn-based company. Beethoven was born in Bonn. Can we finish this Beethoven 10 with AI? And I was like, yeah, I did not expect that. Sure, we can. I mean, I don't know. We have to see. Musicologically, it's difficult from a computer science standpoint. It's probably also not very simple. So I need to put together a team. And he said, yeah, do that, Matthias. Put together a team and let me know in 3 months if it's possible. So we flew to Boston, convened at the Harvard Music Library, talked to Bob Levin, who was or is the expert in finishing unfinished works by Mozart. He can improvise in his style and so on. I had Ahmed El-Gamal from Rutgers University, who was sort of a leading figure in the world of
art history,
art and completions and generative adversarial networks and so on. And we had Mark Gotham from the world of composition / music theory / music informatics. And this was a big team of experts, and we would go through every sketchbook, through all of the literature on generating music and generating with AI. And in the end, we decided that this paper that was written 2 years prior on attention and how you need that to create interesting AI systems would be the blueprint of what we wanted to do. Essentially, the model of the transformer architecture that was then used in OpenAI's GPT-1 and GPT-2 to that point, we thought would be very, very interesting for music. And essentially what it does is it says, well, every note that we generate is a function of all of the notes that came before. Like, it's very simple to explain. If I sing ba 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 ba, they don't sing because they are scared. but it's of course da, and everyone knows it because I mean they are familiar with the melody, but it works also with a melody that you don't know. You will always be able to predict the next most probable note, given the notes that came before. And we set out to build this transformer for music. And we created a transformer based architecture on the music of, say, the mid-18th to the 1830s. We put in a lot of music that we knew Beethoven had studied, and then we fine-tuned it with Beethoven's work. And so essentially you could say we created a large music model on the transformer architecture. And the sketches, and this is my last sentence on this, and then we can listen. The sketches are then the prompt. So we prompt the network with the sketch, and we get a completion overnight. And we do that 200, 300 times overnight. And with the resulting material, I mean, lots of iterations, but with the resulting material, we then create a potential 10th symphony. That was the approach we took.
Kind of be the human in the loop, no?
Yes.
Maybe visible director.
Oh yeah. This is not a system where you press a button, out comes a symphony. This is actually an example for how humans and algorithms interact to do something creatively. And the computer couldn't do without us, and we couldn't do without the computer in this case. And that was what made this interesting, because it was a way, in a way, a vision that we tried to exemplify here, right? We create something that can be used by other humans to work on new output. But it knows everything around 1750 to 1830, all of the music is in there, and with a specific emphasis on Beethoven.
I have a very fitting question, but I think we should listen to it first.
Yeah, we will now listen to 1 minute of music. And I explained to you the sketch is a prompt, and then at some point the AI comes in, and you can listen to this recording, which was done by a real orchestra, by humans, and you can decide for yourself, or maybe if you're bold, you raise your hand when you think it's the case. When does Beethoven stop and when does the AI begin? It's 1 minute of music. It could happen anywhere in between.
I will share the screen of the browser window where the sample is, and I hope this works. Okay. I see there's Mark-Khaled has a question, but let's do questions after the music, okay? Please, somebody in the audience, raise your hand that you can hear the music. Jan, for example.
The sound is distorted.
Is it?
Yeah.
I think the background noise reduction, it just cuts it. So maybe you can stream the whole audio.
Leiser machen, Max? Ich glaube. Is it better now?
No, we can't hear anything now. I think the microphone won't pick up the music because it's Zoom. It tries to filter it out.
Okay.
But maybe if you can stream it from your laptop when you share the screen.
For you guys online, there is a link in the chat that everyone should be able to access. You can listen to the first track on your own computers. So we're talking about the first track. We can wait for another minute before I give the.
Yes.
Did you guys raise your hand? I didn't.
I tried, but then it was too much messy things around. I couldn't concentrate.
Okay, should we play it again and everybody listens? I can also, for the people who will watch this later on the internet.
I mean, we can give the solution, right? I mean, it's kind of a. This is a game that we started doing when we talked about the project and various events and so on, and everyone was skeptical and said like, no, this is not gonna work. This is a terrible idea. The computer will be so bad, and there was this whole, sort of human backlash against this project, which we anticipated, by the way. And so we said like, okay, well, we're gonna play you something. And you'll just play that game with us. And no one could do it because we're talking about 8 seconds of Beethoven and the rest is AI. And a lot of the moments in what I played to you that sound very much like Beethoven, they are actually AI generated and not by Beethoven. And so people were confused and they were like, what? I cannot distinguish. Well, you know, I gotta change my mind or get more furious or what's going to happen, you know? It's so this was really a way to make people engaged. And of course, you can imagine this was before ChatGPT. We started the project when GPT-2 was released. When we finished, GPT-3 had just been released in 2020. Then we kept working on the project a little bit longer, and then ChatGPT came much later. This kind of project would not have been possible. I mean, it would have been possible, but technically, but in terms of explosion of interest after ChatGPT would not have been possible. We basically were in the news all over the world with this, and the Deutsche Telekom measures this in a number that's called earned media, which is the amount of money you would have to spend in order to get that much media exposure. And it was in the hundreds of millions. It was the biggest project they ever did, the CEO told me, in terms of communication.
Wow.
But after ChatGPT, this would have not been possible because before everyone said like, no computer can ever do something like this. Now everyone says that, yeah, of course computers can do this. Is this all? I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. It should be able to do so much more. So
Should we take the question in the audience?
yeah, let's take questions.
Mark Hanitz.
He's already on the beach.
Yeah, no. It was very nice presentation. Actually, I was thinking that you were using GPT-2, and when you were explaining, if you I understood that you use it GPT-2 or no? Or similar transformer? Yeah,
we created our own transformer for music and trained it from scratch.
Okay. Yeah. Before you said something that for me was interesting. It's like you were saying about unstructured data sets and to kind of like to have more open unstructured data sets. What you mean about that? Because like when you are entering, for example, text, that's unstructured. When you train with images, as is unstructured also. It's in the figure of unstructured data, and you don't define the. My understanding is unstructured because you don't define the dimensions that are actually picking up in these things, and actually is the dimensions are not defined, but there is an inner structure in the data that is trying to learn. But anyway, I was interested in this topic because I now actually I'm writing my thesis on strategies of artists using neural networks, and I definitely would like to cite your Beethoven as I now understand how you did it, and I think it's quite interesting example. And yeah, but maybe can you elaborate on this of them, because it's definitely now more and more clear that and you in your talk definitely was I think this essence for me, that the data sets are the key, and more and more they say that the algorithms that you use is actually unimportant in a way, and the data set is actually what it makes more matter. The architecture, they matter just in a little sense.
Yeah, thank you. I think you put your finger right on the spot that is interesting to me, and where there are lots of question marks. I'm very interested in the theory of learning itself. And how can biological systems, for instance, learn in an environment that is, by definition, relatively unstructured? I mean, it's, sort of the essence of structured versus unstructured. If you look at life forms in their habitat, very unstructured. And then I look at the way that we build learning systems in the world of technology. And these, as you rightfully say, they work on data that in itself is very structured, right? And what I'm trying to say is that this approach of using systems that need highly structured data to learn from is hitting a wall. And as I understand you correctly, you say, well, but in an image, there is not much structure in the image. Yes, that's right. But the data that we use to represent that image is highly structured. It's like in music, the MIDI file is highly structured. We translate that into a vector, which is even more structured. And then this is what the machine is learning on. So is there a way for us to build systems in the domain of technology that can learn from more unstructured input? That is my question. And one way forward that I see is to focus on the training set and add more dimensions to it. That doesn't necessarily make it unstructured. It makes it just more complex and more, multidimensional. The other approach that people are using is instead of working with one network, create multiple networks that interact. That's also increasing the complexity. That might yield better results. But the question I'm asking, and I don't have any answer to it, I should make that very clear, is it also possible for the systems we have currently to learn more on unstructured data and get information out of that and learn from that? These are questions that I have, and these are things that I find interesting, and I don't have any answers. I also don't want to say that our Beethoven example is, or that our Beethoven work is an example for this. Although when we initially wanted to publish the results in a concert in 2020 in March, and then COVID came along. And so we couldn't have a public performance of music, so project got delayed. So we had more time, and what we did was we said, all right, let's work on the training data set and make it a little bit more multidimensional, if you will. We added high-level analytical information on the training data set. We said, like, is this a moment in the music where a theme gets introduced? Is this a moment where a theme gets developed? Is this a moment where theme 1 and 2 get combined? So we had this high-level information. We fed that also into the training data set, and it created better results, in our opinion. So this is what we tried back then. You have to imagine this is not research. This was applied sort of research, if you will. We really had a deadline. We wanted to finish something. It had to be done. There was a lot of pressure. So I think more can be done in that vein. We just didn't have the time to do it.
Nice. Rodrigo Cadiz, who joins us from Chile.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your talk. And, it's very early here in Santiago, so it's kind
Thanks
of
for
cold.
waking up. Huh?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple of questions about if you could give more details about the actual training method and the network. I'm curious about the coder you use for that. I assume you were using MIDI, but I wonder if you use text also, and if it was just only MIDI. What about in your thinking about, because I do similar things, but I always wonder about dynamics, articulations,
Yeah.
and ornaments, a lot of more sophistication that a score has, way more than MIDI. So
Yes.
but maybe for Beethoven it's okay to use MIDI. I don't know, maybe that's the case. But and how do you I understand how you train it and how can you use it, but you have to decide which output to use. So because you have literally millions of possibilities to complete a bar, right? And so how do you choose that? How was your process of selecting kind of music you wanted to continue?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I don't know a lot about the different training methods involved. Basically, the setup is this. Ahmed El-Gamal was the lead on the computer science side, and he was working with 2 postdocs on this project. And initially, and then later on, only 1 postdoc, and he was not only a specialist in these kinds of transformer architectures, which was something that he was sort of researching, but also was an extremely good Python programmer. So that was a person who did that. And you're absolutely right. MIDI is sort of the bare bones minimum that you can use to do something in music. And this was something that we felt not happy about, but at the same time, we had to be practical about it. And it was difficult enough to get all of the data together. We were always wondering, do we even have enough data if we take all of the pieces that were composed in that time? But it turned out that there was enough. We had about 3,000 musical pieces in the training data set. And MIDI was just a common denominator, really, because most, first of all, anything in music XML, you can transform it to MIDI. Anything that doesn't exist in music XML or other formats, you can kind of, it's available in MIDI. So MIDI was our thing to do. It's also easy to create MIDI because, you basically have a skilled piano player in front of a keyboard. And they just play the music, and the output, you save it in MIDI, and there you are. So totally right. I think we could do so much more if we had a training data set that was, of better quality.
So we're at a very interesting point, I think, because the piece was performed at the Elbphilharmonie by a symphony orchestra, which probably most of the players played Beethoven before.
Yes.
So you get this free training of the individuals that are there. And if they see a MIDI sequence of Beethoven-like notes, they probably fill in the gaps of and stuff like that, which a regular person at a piano with the same score would never sort of like be able to reproduce. Is that true? Or?
That's yet another story, because they saw actually a score.
Yeah.
This is part of the question that Rodrigo asked, is then where the output of the network is essentially MIDI files. And you get lots of them, lots of completions of the sketch, okay? And what we then did in a first pass through, or many times, was we took the output, or let's say 200 versions of it, we listened to it as a team of experts, and we gave scores on how well was each measure, and where did it start to become boring, and these kinds of decisions. And then with that information that we gave back to the computer scientists, they changed the training parameters, and they changed also, when we prompted the network, the temperature and settings and so on, to create higher quality. And after we've done that a couple of times, we felt that the output was sufficiently good enough. And what then happened was that we had a group of musical experts who would choose from basically from then fewer completions, the one that they wanted to work on. And they started to work with that one, and then they had the possibility to use a network that would, stitch things together, or to use a network that would create harmonic progressions, or to say, well, we want to take this part and we'll give it back into the network to create some more. So this was a very interactive approach, one in which the collective group of musicologists working and composers working on this were sort of steering and interacting with the AI. So it's a 100% human-machine co-creation, I would say. In the end, we kind of looked at the material and we calculated how many notes are original Beethoven and how many notes are from the AI, and it is about 5 to 7% around is original Beethoven material. But yeah, it's a total collaboration. Plus, then we also tried to create a version, an AI that could orchestrate. Basically, from a MIDI score, go to a full orchestral score. And this is a very interesting thing. I think this can be done easily with a good training data set. And I think there are even softwares out there that can do that successfully now. But our AI we didn't have a lot of training data for that. You need a full score, and you need basically piano reductions in MIDI form to do that. And our AI created a score, orchestral score, and we set it to, into a notation form that the musicians can read. We gave it to the musicians, and they said, no, it's terrible, we can't play it. It wasn't idiomatic enough in many instances. So what we did was we worked with an orchestrator who took the AI score and tried to retain most of the ideas the AI had about orchestrating, but also making it playable. So here again, there's a lot of interaction between our output and an expert. So this is what was possible around 2019 and 20. I'm sure today we can go beyond this much more and have much more of it created by AI itself. On the other hand, that wasn't really my goal. My goal was to create something that allows us to do things that we humans cannot do on our own, but also use the technology in a way that what was created is still an expression of our collective creativity as a team.
There is something which I would like to ask regarding the final product. Like, I remember when I listened to the broadcast, and walking out of that, I had the feeling like locally this was like very credible, like, sound like Beethoven. And then once the whole thing was played out, I had the same feeling I have when I look at a classicist column capital in comparison to a real Roman capital or real Greek capital. So there was this kind of thing where it's like, yeah, I cannot put my finger on it, but the structure as a whole, that's where it sort of like it doesn't capture me.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
So three things about this. Is it three, or do I just say three and then I make up a third? It's definitely two. One is Beethoven would normally have this process of collecting ideas and working with the ideas for a very, very long time. And only if the publisher would threaten to kill him, he would actually get to work to compose it. Does that sound familiar?
No.
So the actual composition for Beethoven would be another sheet of paper and then starting from scratch with the ideas from the sketchbooks. Now, in the very first idea for the project, I thought, okay, what we need to train the machine on is the process from the sketch to the finished composition, and we can do that as musicians, as musicologists, for some ideas.
Sure.
But it's just not enough data.
Yeah, actually.
But it would be possible to do. So first of all, the result lacks this maturation on the side of Beethoven on his musical ideas. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you are right in saying it's sort of like a classicist version, in that Beethoven, in his sketches, is going back to classicist models.
Okay.
He's going back to his own early days, pre-1800, which is very different from what he writes around, 1826, 27. It's very different. And so the piece Beethoven had in mind was very different from the Ninth Symphony and from the late string quartets. He wanted to do something simple and pure again. So we tried to be close to what the intention might have been by Beethoven. And that hurt us somehow because people expected Beethoven's tends to be bombastic,
Super nice.
you know, like Schönberg, or I don't know. Yeah. So these two things happen. And then the third one obviously is, you know, there is just the sketches themselves, they say very little about how the material should be developed. Okay, and what happens in this compositional process, that's kind of the first point, but here's my third point, you know, you have this sort of organic growth that is missing in this process.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like the idea that you say there is this sort of process where we don't have enough documentation, but you can clearly see the processes in musicologist, right?
Yeah.
So I actually have a book chapter which needs to be published, which is about centuries of sample and remix, which is sort of based on work which I did right after my PhD, where you can trace the exact same phenomena for building reconstruction. So people take samples, just sketches, often multiple things showing the same part, and then you integrate them, you make a full reconstruction, you refragment, you recompose and stuff like that. And, you know, you can clearly see that these stages exist, even though there's not a single sort of like testament where we have the whole process in one go, right? So this is very rare. I mean, it's not true. There's 2, 3 where we have something where we have all the sketches and the integrations and the refragmentation and the reintegration and stuff like that. So this is sort of something which I think is quite interesting because if you look at the field of remix studies, we look at, you know, visual samples from photographs or the 6 seconds aiming break or Get On Up by James Brown, while this is the actual root of sampling, right? So this is, you sample your own sketches, basically.
Yeah.
And what happens as that process pans out, because it's so slow, it's faster, it's slower than you have time for thinking, so you can think it over while you do it.
Yeah.
And so that is a sort of like really, really interesting process, which I think cultural analytics wise would be really interesting to see in a lot of genres, which I'm pretty sure you can probably see in film, you can probably see in text, you can probably see I know for a fact you can see it in drawings, and obviously there is also music, which is really, really interesting.
Well, you know, you also see with Beethoven, when I talk about sketchbooks and compositional fragments and stuff like this, and compositional manuscripts, we only see one aspect of maybe 3 or 4 that contribute to his compositions. Beethoven was considered one of the premier improvisers of his time.
Okay.
So Beethoven would play concerts in which he improvised, like Keith Jarrett, just fully improvised everything. And people would pay money to go to these concerts. And everything that he did as a improviser, a lot of that is not written down.
Yeah.
I mean, his improvisations often served as starting points for compositions. Mozart, same way, he could also improvise very well. And so a lot of that is not missing in a system like ours necessarily, because we don't have a record of these improvisations unless they were then written down, which happened rarely. So there's that. Then there's his whole intellectual side where he would. There's a great paper by Birgit Lodes, and she's talking about how for one of the late string quartets, which has a very interesting cyclical form, it's a very strange piece of music. She can show that at the same time he's composing this, he's reading a book of Indian philosophy, which, you know, deals with the, he had access to huge libraries in Vienna with all sorts of books from all parts of the world and in translations and so on. He's a very intellectual person. It's something that we forget. So all of these ideas, as far as they are not encoded in the music already, we don't have access to. That's why I now make a little jump. In the Karajan Institute, we try to create data sets not around music only, not only around the music, but also the letters he wrote, the conversations he had, the interviews he gave. So we try to transcribe everything put it in databases. We now use large language models to summarize, extract information from it. These are derived data sets that we put in relation with the original data set, but it's all there. And the idea is that, you know, somehow there's a relationship between these expressions verbally and what he does as an artist, you know. So this is, I don't know where this is going to lead us. But my conviction is that if you are an artist today, you'll probably be thinking and want to be thinking about how do I present my artworks in a data form? How do I turn what I do into an archive as I live, not the generation after me, you know, like it used to be. Like we are the archivists of Herbert von Karajan. Well, now the next Herbert von Karajan will be his or her own archivist. And you'll be thinking about how to represent your work in a data form right the moment you create it. Why? Because so much of the monetization that follows through AIs and other systems will depend on you doing a good job on that.
It's even worse. I think it's even worse. There's no way you can catalog your own thing without these methods. Because, like, if you work with a instrument that is not deterministic, where you don't play a score, but you interact with sources of uncertainty in a model synthesizer, for example, the only way to capture moments that are awesome is to just like have the recording on all the time, and you will not find the awesome place without like looking at all the recordings. And at some point you have hundreds of hours of recordings. It's like, how do you actually digest that, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But what I mean is, large part of what you do is that you constantly revisit your old files. You try to extract something from them, put it into a different form that you can then use in your current work. So in a way, you have to be in constant data exchange dialogue with your own creations. Yeah.
I'd like to get to something.
There are also some questions in there.
We talked over lunch, which is also related to what Rodrigo said. First, Mar has another question.
Oh, I wanted to ask another thing, but now you touched something about this having your own archive. I'm a practicing artist in the field of art and technology. And well, I would love to have a great archive of my work. I mean, I have over 70 works right now done, and more than 100 something exhibitions, more than 150 exhibitions. It's very hard. I mean, for example, I try to document all my works, and some of them, they have manuals of more than 100 pages. But I have to say that the last years I couldn't do. Like that I did during a period where the studio that we used to have people employed. But now since COVID, we are basically me and Barbara, like my wife, who is also my artist partner. And yeah, it's hard to keep up of like the documenting part, for example, is highly important, I think. But at the same time, it's very time consuming. And hardly you see, at the beginning at least, you don't see the reward. I mean, for me, the reward was whenever I need to reinstall 3 years later, 5 years later, some of my work, I have some of the works I have detailed until the distance between two screws of things. I have to say also that with doing things with technology, also the thing changed. Things that I used to do with rare projection, nowadays I will do with a LED screen. If this will be acquired by museum and I will be there, probably they will still do it the same way because they don't want to change the format that I did and so on. But since I'm the artist, I'm allowed to kind of reformat the work in a way, just a little bit how you also were saying. And that's how we can do, right? But yeah, another thing I wanted to mention is about you were kind of saying, oh, if I would have better data set and so on for the Beethoven. My perspective on this of the data sets is actually there is no perfect data set. Even now, the large language models, they are complaining that they basically OpenAI recently had to admit, and I think it's because of the new directive of the AI Act in Europe, that they are using copyright material. Because one thing that the AI Act is saying that you need to tell if you had used copyright material on the thing. But the thing is that their claim to use copyright material is because there is no enough non-copyright material that you can train large language models, and you can start to use synthetic data sets, but still, well, first is that synthetic data sets is not the same as the real data set. If you will make a synthetic data set of music, will not have the same quality as if you will train with the great hits of, I don't know, the last century, or even the centuries. It will be something that actually don't have the main characteristic of a human touch, that is the curating. You had told several times that there is a human on the loop. In the Beethoven and in many things, the AI needs the human in the loop, because 99% of the possibility space is garbage, and 1% is the excellent choice. And to select between the excellent choice and the garbage, the intuition of the AI model, most of the times, it fails. And then, as you also mentioned, and is basically is the small choices what makes a great piece. Means the generation capabilities that the generative AI give are very high, but I think in the artistic sense, still artists will be in the loop, because the thing is, it's just an instrument more. It's a one instrument more. Like the instrument of the classical music were the ones we know, no? The piano and other ones, and the instruments of this century will be AI, and working with data, but still with the people on the loop, especially on the creative side, I think, because otherwise we'll just go into the irrelevance. The thing is that if you had a lot of attention with the 10th Symphony, is actually because was something referred to a human production. If you will say, oh, I just invented a composer and we made 10 operas, the relevance will be zero. Okay. But because there is a lot of people who appreciate Beethoven, then they see kind of this on this continuation, and they see still the human in the loop, and they see the human touch, and they see actually a new kind of extension of that. And I think this is what is more important. And yeah, I mean, just like I wanted to talk about this, some of the aspects that we talk, I think that they are very important, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we agree anyhow on the points that you raised. For me, the interesting part is how can a technology be used to help me in my creation? And
Sure.
and obviously, Beethoven is a great name, and having his anniversary helps, and doing something with a technology that at that point very few people understood. All of these things help to create a certain communication hype. What that also shows us is that the human in the loop is the important part for it to be meaningful for us. And that, is a great thing. At the same time, I'm also trying to push the boundary of what's possible with the technology. And when I talk about if we had, a better training data set, we could do this and that and that, then that's sort of that part of me speaking, trying to just create something that isn't possible right now. I also believe that the whole talk about training data set for OpenAI, you know, and using copyright material and how much training data they use and so on, goes a little bit besides the point, and that is that probably there's only so much you can do with a single network. And, you know, we have to really focus on looking at how we can actually achieve networks of networks and stuff like this that create something interesting. So I think OpenAI is doing a great job with, you know, user interfaces for the LLMs, and they're very strong. Others are there too, but the really interesting stuff is happening, I think, on experiments of smaller scale with more networks and, you know, more eclectic kind of use cases. This is what I'm interested in right now.
Yeah, no.
Is it timely?
Yeah, sure.
No, I'm just interested. I think connects to a few topics. So your point on creating your own archive, this idea of small data sets. So I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on the idea of, you know, what about the people who don't have the capability to that kind of muscle to create their own archive. What about underrepresented kind of groups or you know, styles of music and things like that? So I'm okay. I also have to make a disclosure. I'm part of a project which aims to tackle this. So it's
Cool.
music responsible AI, and it's an international network, and we are looking at use cases precisely of that, like small data sets. Because if we see that this is kind of the future where we go. Yes, then those who can create their own archives and those who are in the spotlight may get an advantage versus the small artist or the small or ethnical music niches, because this may become, you know, the search engine of the future, right? So visibility will generate visibility, and it becomes like a snowball that has the opposite effect for underrepresented music, right?
Yes.
Be it urban music or ethnical music, or so what solutions do you foresee to offset this imbalance of power, let's say?
Yeah. It's an important question. I'm very interested in what's happening in the space of decentralized systems for dealing with data. Okay, dealing in the sense of selling data and making data available for machine learning purposes. I'm in particular very interested in what the Ocean Protocol is doing. Ocean as in the sea. Ocean Protocol is a system that has been around for quite some time now. It's essentially a decentralized marketplace for data. So you can create data repositories that others can use. You can earn money for that. You can compute on data without giving away your data to third parties. Things like this. I think this is very interesting for a lot of data owners that don't want to or don't have the means to create their own AI models. At the same time, I also believe that creating your own AI model will get easier and easier. So you have possibilities even though you don't have big budget. By the way, I don't have big budgets for this either. I mean, it's
You have the technical savvy or the awareness.
Yeah, and it has been my life doing this. So yeah, there's more sources there than someone who's further away from this technology world, let's say. But the important point that you're raising is if we think about the internet of the future, then how will that look like? Right now, I engage a lot with the internet or the network of computers on many different levels. I think a lot of people limit their exposure to this data network through one or two entry points. And if we see what is happening now, that it plays out, that the search engines like Google and Bing are sort of replaced by chatbots in a way that sort of filter through all of the information and give it to us. And then you have the problem of how will my work be represented in all of these search results? I mean, the problem is the same with Google as it will be with ChatGPT. What is the solution to that? I don't know. I simply don't know. I think it needs to be something that a network of humans needs to figure out, you know. And maybe we'll see the rise again of the Usenet groups, you know, where people have small interest groups where, you know, this kind of exchange of information can happen.
So yeah, this is one of the things we're going to discuss in this. I can send you the link later to the project.
I think I heard of it already.
Yeah, well, it's just starting, so there's no real official, but I'll send you our work in progress link, which is connected to the PI of the project. It's University of Arts London, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes, super cool. I think there's 2 points I would like to, like, one is harking back to this comment I inspired by Rodrigo, which I think is related to that, which is that there is this huge difference between what's possible and what's meaningful. And the entry towards what's meaningful is not yet something that we know. Like, if we talk in power structure, yeah, you sit on the Karajan archive, and you could say that's a powerful situation, but
for example, is the set we're working our use case with the set of music in Estonia, which is kind of quite a specific type of folk music.
Yeah, but so at the same time, both of these examples, this is probably not the music and also not the Estonian music of the future, which we don't know. Like my favorite example, my background is in art history. Like, to give you an example, you can see in the collection profile of museums that contemporary art typically means the age of the donors that are dying right now. So contemporary art right now is sort of between 1965 and 1970 on the median age in museums. And if you look at the fade off of what's in the museums, you can actually sort of like estimate that half of the artworks that could be in museums or will be in museums in the next 30, 40 years are still in the living rooms of people, and we have no idea. So we're in some sense, you say we're the archivists of Karajan, but we cannot be the archivists of the contemporary, right? If you see like what we now see as the pinnacle of timing structured music, it's Chedilla in the 1990s, but we don't know what's going on in 2024, 2025. Like, what's actually the cutting edge that is not making 100 million on the telecom communication infrastructure because the audience is not ready, but it lives in these cubicles where people in small groups do something, maybe with very little. Like, one of the key things I think that is important is that, you know, in the end, to find this niche in the vast sea of possibility, all you need is a particular instrument you could have built yourself, a little bit of mathematics, or some new way to see some old stuff. Maybe just to, you know, take the Ave Verum of Mozart. You know, it sounds good in how many places? Like, you know, you want to hear it in a church. So if you play it in some other place, it's bad. And so in the same way, somebody may find the one, you know, sort of room where their guitar sounds particularly good. And there will be, even though they may not be rich, they will not be privileged, they produce something that is sort of like rocking and awesome. And I think that is a quite interesting thing. If we look at the history of the last 30, 40, 50 years of music, a lot of the best music that we now consider the best music, like not best in the sense of like I find it best, but stuff that was very influential is actually stuff that grew in places that are decidedly not Ivy League institutions, Berkeley, or right. So that is, I think, something which is quite interesting. So it's more there's another problem, like how do we find the places that are awesome? And so we had a discussion over lunch that I brought some things which I just want to sort of like, for those who see this particularly later in the internet, why is it that we are interested in a particular way in cultural analytics, not like in the present? Like, as I said, in the conference, there were out of 100 contributions, there was 2, 3 on music. But why do I think that this is really important for the future? So it serves to sort of, bring to mind how recent this phenomenon is and how far ahead, and this is where we sort of differ, maybe or not, how recent this technology and music thing is. Like, music has always been technology. Like, read Vitruvius of how theaters are sort of like, sort of resonating with the sound that is spoken and stuff like that. It's all technology, but really trying to sort of de-boundaryify, like in German, there's a word called entgrenzen, which doesn't exist in English, like get rid of boundaries. One has to go back to this person, which is Ferruccio Busoni, the design of a new aesthetic, or the draft of a new aesthetic of sound art, 1910, who dreamt of, he was a pianist, so he had discrete keys, but he was dreaming of a sort of like continuous glissando, a knob that you can turn and you can do this, which in 1910 was not that easy accessible, but we now have in every instrument. Like, even if you buy a piano, there's probably some kind of knob where you can sort of play with the, with the filter your nods, and you can filter your tone, and you can do the same thing. And that was the beginning, theoretically, of what is now electronic music. But then it took till 1960 to arrive at this, the computer as a musical instrument, which is a paper by Max Matthews, 1960, in Science magazine. The Max Matthews who also came up with Graphics 1, which is the first computer graphics system to design chips. So it was for engineering, CAD design, graphical display, and at the same time, he came up with this way of like producing music. And what they say in this paper is like the most important point from their side is not only can the computer produce music, as long as your computer can produce 10,000 numbers per second, you can play any tone up to 5,000 hertz. Obviously, if it's 40,000 numbers, it's up to 20,000 hertz. So you lose 2 octaves in their model. But they say, even if it's only 10,000, any 20-minute composition, the amount of compositions that are possible is a 1 with 128 zeros. So that's not just more than there is sort of like atoms in the universe. This is just an unbelievable number. While at the same time, people have done experiments where they said, okay, like Claude Shannon's wife, for example, with a guy called R.T. Pierce, I have the book here, it's called Simple Signals and Noise. They had this experiment where they would actually just count how many transitions from one note to another to exist in Mozart, and then roll dice to come up with note sequences, basically artificial Mozart. And Mattias mentioned this is sort of like primitive Markov chain sort of like algorithm, which is approximately contemporary, all happening around the same crowd of people, Bell Labs and so on. And one of the interesting things they realized is that this sounds awesome for 3 seconds or 10 seconds, and then it becomes incredibly boring. So it's incredibly bounded compared to the one with 128 zeros. And I think that is, cultural analytics-wise, one of the humbling things. There is no way we will ever understand all possible music, or all possible visual art, or all possible text. And culture seems to be bounded. That's the reason why data sets are so important. But it also means that in the vast sea of stuff that is possible but boring, there may be niches which are not reachable with what we already have. So having all the data in the state library, having all the data in all music ever published, may not give you access to the music that's most awesome in the next 100 years. In some sense, I think that is sort of like the big challenge of where, and this is what I like so much about Matthias, your work, and the work of Mar as a generative artist, that analysis and creativity, performance, practice go together, because that's the only way of how we can wiggle ourselves out of this bounded boringness of stuff we already know. And music is one of the most crazy things there, because you can approach any instrument, even if it's one you know. If you give yourself the leeway to hit the wrong note, it's always possible to come up with something that nobody has ever heard. And that is sort of something which I think would be cool to sort of maybe discuss in the sort of like last 15 minutes here, is where do we see the future? Like, what is beyond what we do right now? Like, we have all this data, all our dreams of the 1990s are fulfilled. Even people who are poor have a cell phone, which can do everything, has GarageBand, probably some free version of it. So how do the next 10 years look like?
Simple question, right?
Sorry. Beethoven's 11th?
No, certainly not. That one we can rule out. Well, maybe someone will do it. I don't know. I think right now there's really a little bit of a turf war going on around AI. And so the mentality of a lot of people seems to be there's going to be one model that will win. Sort of this mentality of Peter Thiel that he outlined in his book 0 to 1, which is Peter Thiel is an American investor. He did PayPal. He did, he was as a founding member of Palantir and other companies. He's a big venture capitalist, and his theory is whatever you do, whatever problem you are solving, because the startups are thinking about problems that they solve a problem and then they want to own the market fully as a monopolist. That is the best case for them, for them and the investors, and for everyone. Peter Thiel believes for everyone, because then you have a good technology and so on. I think this kind of model is outdated. It's completely outdated, and what we will be seeing in its stead, and this is my perspective on it, is not a system where we strive to create monopolies around solutions for problems. Because when we do that, we hinder innovation going forward. Essentially the monopolist has no intention of actually making more progress. They want to milk the cow as long as the cow is alive. And as long as that problem persists and their solution can help. So what we see instead, I think, is a situation in which it becomes extremely difficult to actually go from 0 to 1 and recoup all of your investments, because the solution you created will be available instantaneously to a lot of other people. So you're constantly sharing the market around the innovation that you did. And so you could say that's the end of innovation, the venture capital style, because why would I put my money into something that I can never recoup? Or you could say it's the beginning of a kind of innovation that is really driven to solve collective problems that are important for our society to be solved. And we put our resources and our creativity on solving these issues jointly. And actually, the goal is not to recoup all of that money, but rather to then move on to the next problem and solve that one. So it's a kind of a reversal of Peter Thiel's ideas. I think this is going to happen. What does that mean for music and art? I'm not sure. My feeling is there's a trend right now of artists saying, I don't want my work to be used in training of artificial neural networks. I think that is perhaps the wrong way to do it. I think what these artists are doing is they are taking their work outside of the discourse, outside of the actual interactivity with other artists, and they're starting to create artworks for themselves only, without any public. And what we need to do in the future is right now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have a lot of transparencies around what goes into a network, and that we have processes in place that actually distribute the value generated of these networks to the participants in the training data set. So it's a question of redistributing the money. This is, I think, the big discussion. We touched upon that here a little bit. And I think that this is where important decisions will be made in the next couple of months and years. So my perspective on all this is we're going to see what we have with Wikipedia, which is sort of a crowd-sourced and crowd-funded entity that collects knowledge and presents knowledge. We're going to see that with what are the big unsolved problems in the world. We're going to see databases that list all of the problems that can be solved. And we're going to see also networks of AIs, transparent AIs that can be used, searched, that replace sort of traditional ways of presenting data like websites and so on. I think those keep on existing, but they lose in importance. And the interactive mode and the APIs to all of these AIs will supersede the traditional way that we organize our internet. And therefore, you know, cultural production will also change a little bit.
Mhm.
And I think these aspects of thinking along your sort of data set curation versus developing your APIs versus creating content and talking about your content. I think the job of an artist will become more multifaceted as it already is, and these aspects will be part of your job.
Mhm.
So those are my thoughts for the future.
Nice.
Not many will like it, but some will love it.
I mean, there's a precedent in nature, which is speaking against monopolies. We're not slime mold. We're, as Beethoven would say, brain carriers, and there are 7 billion of us. And if there would be an advantage in being one central mainframe, we probably would be that. But somehow that's not what we are. But at the same time, altruism is part of a game, and so the question is, can we sort of like optimize that? Can we sort of like optimize for altruistic sharing and not sort of like killing each other? And that is, I think, a big issue. The question is like the kind of like greed that drives the sort of like 0 to 1 mentality. How can we sort of like deal with that?
Yeah.
Because in some sense, if you say, okay, the heterogeneity, like the awesomeness of the music, and now I hesitate to say market or industry or whatever, but the music that is known, that was published in the 20th century, the awesomeness of it is its heterogeneity, even though there's very clearly a problem of boundedness. Like I had this, and this is sort of maybe something which maybe a good question to you too. So I work in a record store and I collected records, not many, but I always try to focus on the ones that are sort of keeping up for very long. And one of the most profound, weird experiences I had was going to a place called Josie's Record in Dallas-Fort Worth, which is a massive IKEA-sized store. And you walk in and there's 2 sides, and it's rock and roll and R&B, which basically it's a racist division of the music market into white music and black music. And if you ask at the sort of like entrance, and it was like, so where's Giorgio Moroder and Donna Summer? And they look at you like, I have no idea. They cannot point you which side, because Giorgio Moroder will totally be under rock and roll, and Donna Summer will totally be on the black side. And you look at all this, and you find out, oh, all the international stuff is in one tiny box in the corner in an IKEA-sized store. I was like, wow, this needs to be documented. So I went out and went to sort of like, you know, secondhand book estate sales and stuff like that to get sort of an essence of the material. And this is particularly striking in classical music. Their program is completely different than in Europe. Like obviously Eugene Ormandy, lots of Rachmaninoff, lots of that kind of stuff, Tchaikovsky, you know, things that, you know, sounds awesome in Texas or in Estonia, by the way, because there's nothing to see on the horizon. While in, you know, southern Germany, you would have a lot of Mozart, Beethoven, the usual kind of stuff. And so Karajan is very much a phenomenon of this thing that he's part of. He's not only part of the canon, he's in some sense a 2-digit percentage of the canon, right? Like in Germany, you go to a cupboard of somebody having a collection with classical music records, there's a good chance 20 to 30, 40% is actually Karajan recordings. And so what does it mean? Because obviously this cannot be a reflection of like what happened with classical music in the last centuries. And number two is like, what's the legacy into the future? Like will we see a complete reconfiguration? Because the US situation for me, it very clearly means like, okay, no, like you can collect all the music that was published in the last 50 years. It's way too bounded and does not respect everything that was going on. There's way too little Big Mama Thornton and way too much Elvis.
Yeah, I don't know if I fully understand the issues that you raised, but from my perspective, what I would say is this. If you look at an artist like Karajan, you rightfully say, like, in sort of the core repertoire, 20 to 30% of the recordings that are being played come from him. Well, in a way, it's the sheer quantity of his output.
Sure, yeah.
But there was also a strategy back then behind it. And that strategy, to be fair, came from the labels who said, Deutsche Grammophon, we have correspondence in our archive, the president of Deutsche Grammophon with Herbert von Karajan, talking about what other pieces of works would he record next. And Deutsche Grammophon always pushed him to do stuff that he hadn't done before. While he would say, well, now we are in a new age. We have a new technology.
It's the Beethoven 7th thing.
And I need to focus my energy on creating the best version possible. So I'd really like to do this again, even though he had done it 3 or 4 times already. And the label guy would say, no, but we want to expand the catalog. So that, they have to find a common ground, essentially. When we created our database of all of the performances he ever did for records, but also for concerts, it was astonishing for me. Music of over 280 composers. That is just incredible. Music of over 280 composers. You look at some of the stuff, and you can all check it out on discoverkarajan.com. The whole database is there. You can even see it on a map, where he did what. Karajan recorded or performed in a concert the first performance of Charles Ives' Music, the Unanswered Question, with the LA Phil ever in the 1950s at Hollywood Bowl. Like, he would touch the stuff that no one else would look at because it was so weird. Granted, he never recorded that one on a record.
Yeah.
But he tried out a lot of this. So what I'm saying is this breadth is really helping us nowadays. Because as you say, if you pick a record on Spotify of Brahms, chances are you get one of his, because it's about the quantity of the recording.
So what you're saying is not just Wendy Carlos being marginalized and Glenn Gould, we only see a selection, but even in Karajan himself, there is the great majority of the material is way more diverse than the Karajan known by people who listen to Bayern 4.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is sort of a chance for you to sort of like, surface. It sounds like the Prince archive. So basically, you can do reiterate sort of Karajan as a sort of much more diverse. Like surface what hasn't been surfaced.
Yeah, but the market is kind of a funny beast, because all of these activities around sort of, promoting material that wasn't performed a lot, going into these very interesting stories that no one has ever heard. There is sort of interest for that amongst a very small group of people. And we love doing that too.
Yeah.
Because it enlarges sort of the breadth of Karajan's footprint. But at the same time, the market really doesn't want that. The market wants a playlist for relaxation. I have respect for that. I also require that quite a lot. But the forces that you're being exposed to as an artist are sometimes pulling you in a direction you don't want to go artistically necessarily. Yeah. So we try to show people what sort of beaten track well,
Mhm.
we try to document this as best as possible,
Mhm.
and we integrate that into our catalog, into the data set,
Mhm.
so that hopefully in the future someone will find it. So we have an inclusive approach. That's what I want to say.
Yes.
And at the same time, we recognize that, you know, the majority of people will be listening to the Blue Danube. And they will, and that's a fine piece of music and a great recording, or the 3 he did. And there's an amazing experience. So that's wonderful. If we can get people to engage with that, that's great. If they want more, well, they can dive deeper.
Mhm.
And sort of, I always say, when you think about the Karajan universe, you have these points of entry. It's almost like a cell, right? You have
Mhm.
these channels through which you
Okay.
log into a protein and it opens the cell.
Nice.
And then
Good,
you go
good.
in. So you have these big pieces. These are the protein receptors on the cell.
Nice.
And we want to get them into the cell. And yeah, it's done via data.
Yeah, thank you very much. I love this comparison. So I hope you also walked into this cell and you come out folded or slightly different, so you can interface with other pieces and other proteins. Next week, we have a second guest in person, which is Richard Rogers of the University of Amsterdam. And then there will be the summer break. And so I thank everybody who joined us online, everybody who's in the room, and everybody who watches this in the future during the summer break. So have a good time. Thank you very much.
Cool.
All right. Thank you very much for the lovely conversation.
Tell me again the name of that project.
Actually, I posted I entered the Zoom chat, posted it there.